Steve, I know we don't talk about it too much on this show, but it deserves a lot of credit. We need to talk about the FCS. We're a few weeks in. We're a few weeks into the season, and we finally have started to see that some of these teams are worth mentioning. There have been a decent amount of FCS upsets this year against FBS teams. I believe we are up to 8 now. Actually, I think it's 9 after this week. A lot of upsets so far. So we need to talk about these. And what better way than to talk about the top 25, how it sits, and how we look at it so far. Steve, break it down and your thoughts about this FCS team and what really sticks out to you so far this year.
Well, what sticks out to me primarily is that in the top 10, you've got the top 2 schools are from the Missouri Valley Conference. There are 3 Missouri Valley Conference schools in the top 10. There are 4 teams from the Big Sky, all in the top 10. So that's telling you that really you've got 2, like we always talk about with the FBS, you've got, the SEC and the Big Ten. In essence, this is what we have here in the FCS. There are some schools like Eastern Washington that are 1 and 2, but they're still ranked in the top 25. I think they're ranked 17, and they're going to be playing Florida coming up. So when we say upsets, I think it's because most folks aren't that familiar unless they're in their region or they're an alum of that school. They're not really as up to speed or familiar with these FCS schools. But for people like myself, I mean, and yourself as well. I mean, we have an affinity. Like for me growing up, it was Princeton and the Ivy League. Mm-hmm. Schools like Fordham and Monmouth and Wagner, all of those really small, like New York metropolitan area schools, Merrimack from Massachusetts. So don't just say, well, they're FCS. They're what they used to call them, 1A, I guess, or whatever demeaning moniker that they had.
Right.
It's not quite as demeaning as Group of 5. For the FBS, but I mean, don't just dismiss these schools because there's a reason they don't get to play top 25 schools. Top 25 schools don't want to play these guys.
Yeah, which is interesting because usually you have to pay these guys a lot of money just to play them. When you see those Power 5 teams and they wind up losing. Obviously, we go back to the days of Appalachian State against Michigan 2004. That's obviously the one that we always refer to when we talk about those big upsets. Obviously, Appalachian State's no longer in the FCS. They're now in the Sun Belt. But when you speak about it, the Ivy League was a league that you followed. For me, it's the Colonial. It's a league that I followed. William & Mary is a school that I was very close on going to, and then I decided on going to Old Dominion. William & Mary's only an hour up the road from me, so I do follow that team. They're 18th in the nation, by the way, which is pretty interesting. The Colonial is one of those interesting leagues. There's no doubt about it. But when you talk about what you just referred to at the Big Sky and the Missouri Valley State or Missouri Valley Conference, you're not wrong whatsoever. There's a lot of them in the top 10, and you see them in the top 25, even with a bad record. Just like you stated, Eastern Washington, some polls have them as low as 20, but at a 1-2 record, you're still getting in the top 20 is still pretty interesting. Eastern Washington, as you said, is going to be playing Florida on Sunday now at noon Eastern due to Hurricane Ian. But let's take a look at that top 10, just like you were talking, Steve. And North Dakota State heads it up with a 3-1 record. They're a Missouri Valley team. South Dakota State in second, another Missouri Valley team. Then you head to the Big Sky with the top-ranked undefeated Montana. They're the highest-ranked undefeated team, so Big Sky. Next, another Big Sky, Montana State. You see a pattern here? North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana State. A lot of stuff in that Midwest there. Rounding out the rest of the top 10, you got number 5, Sacramento State, Big Sky. Delaware, 4-0 at number 6, sitting in the Colonial. They're like an outlier right now based on everybody else. Missouri State, the Missouri Valley sits at number 7. You got Big Sky's Weber State at 8. Jackson State from the SWAC. That's Deion Sanders' team. They finally make it into the top 10, first time in 25 years. They sit at number 9. And then Holy Cross, what you and I know very well after them winning on the Hail Mary against the University of Buffalo this year, from the Patriot League, they sit in the top 10. So a lot of Big Skies and Missouri Valley teams, you're right. Let's look at the top of this rankings with North Dakota State. Many fans know about the players that come out of North Dakota State. You can count some of the starting quarterbacks in the NFL that come from this team. There's plenty of them. Carson Wentz, Trey Lance. when you look at this this team, they're 3-1. Do they deserve that first place vote? Right now, they're receiving 44 of the 54 votes for first place.
Well, I think a lot of that is more based. I think they're throwing out the fact that they lost to Arizona, though really technically they probably haven't seen a little bit of tape on it. They probably easily could have won that game and probably should have won that game, really. But, I think with the FCS, because there's not as much widespread coverage. I mean, with ESPN Plus and ESPN3, and like Fubo Sports and BN Sports and Stadium, a lot of these teams do get televised, but they're generally televised the same time as the FBS games are, so people might overlook them. But I think because you don't have that widespread access, a lot of voters kind of stick with either schools that they're covering in their conference, or they kind of stick with the preseason top 25 until something happens where a team loses a few, they need to fall back or need to fall out. Youngstown State would be a school like that where they really haven't performed up to their usual standards, so they've dropped out of the top 25. But I mean, North Dakota State, ultimately, you got to knock them up. So until Montana would play in North Dakota State, I don't think it's on the regular season schedule. I mean, I don't have a problem with them being number one. In fact, I'm surprised South Dakota State actually didn't get more votes. I thought, again, they played in that embarrassing 7-5 game against Iowa, where there wasn't a touchdown scored, so by either team. But in a lot of ways, you could look at the top 5, top 6 teams, and you can just shake them up, and pick out your bingo number, because any of the top 6 teams probably deserve at least one vote to be the top-ranked FCS team in the nation.
My only thought here, since we're only a few weeks into the season, is if you have a loss, now even if it is against a Power 5 team like Arizona, you see teams like Montana who are undefeated. They sit at number 3 in a lot of FCS polls. You don't give them the benefit of the doubt for not losing a game and move them up 2 spots?
No, see, it's funny because when we talk about FBS schools, I'm always ranting saying undefeated teams need to be ranked ahead. The FCS schedule, because it is so chaotic in the early going, until you really get down into conference play, and it's really going to start. It started up a little bit last week, but it's going to advance going further. I think you can justify in your mind saying, "Well, Montana, they're 4-0. They really haven't played a ranked team in the FCS yet." So you can kind of say, well, North Dakota State's playing a tougher schedule, or South Dakota State. I mean, you can always justify anything, but there are polls out there. I mean, not the major ones, but there are published polls out there that have Montana number 1, primarily for what you just said. They're undefeated.
Yeah, and that makes sense to be. And obviously with the differential of polls, it's kind of like the same as the coaches and the AP that we see in FBS, trying to make it make sense for y'all if you don't pay attention to the FCS. So just like you said, Montana hasn't had those big wins, and I agree with that, and that's probably why they sit number 3. That last week they had a big win over Portland State. But, for example, North Dakota State just beat South Dakota, and South Dakota State just beat number 6 in the FCS, Missouri State. So definitely understand why they're at number 3. All right, last thing I want to go over real quick, in case you have something else as well, is Jackson State. And obviously, when you talk about Jackson State, that's a team that not many people heard of until Deion Sanders popped into the limelight, hopped in there, and brought the SWAC with him. He is in the top 10. Jackson State is in the top 10, I should say, for the first time in 25 years. I think it's an excellent feat for this team to finally get up there. They're 4-0. We've saw some great play, especially from their quarterback. They won 49-7 over Mississippi Valley State. But is this team deserving of that top 10 ranking, Steve?
I'm going to say no. Again, in any sport, but especially in college football, certain teams become media darlings or even fan darlings. I mean, if Deion Sanders is involved with anything, people are going to pay attention to it, whether it be a minor league baseball team, if he went that route. I mean, they're already talking about maybe Deion Sanders is going to go and replace Collins at Georgia Tech because he's got the Atlanta base and roots there, or maybe he's going to go and coach at Auburn. He's in a difficult situation because in the historically Black colleges, they tend to play among themselves in those conferences. And again, it's another thing where even a lot of FCS schools and conferences don't want to schedule these schools because they know how athletic, how well coached they are. They don't want to risk looking or maybe risking their rankings by playing a team like Jackson State. Should they be in the top 25? Absolutely. I'm going to go with the who have they really played as far as quality of schools. If you're a college football program, you've got good athletes. It's very, very rare that you have nothing, but you're participating in athletics. So I don't want to denigrate schools, like from the MEAC or the SWAC or things like that. But Jackson State, they should enjoy this. And this is going to allow them to boost their recruiting, not just at Jackson State, but at Grambling and Mississippi Valley State and all the traditional, Black colleges. So it's a great thing to have them up there. So I can live with it. But honestly, if you're going to put me up to a lie detector, I would tell you they're in the top, like they're 20 to 25, but I don't see them being a top 10 school.
Looking at the rest of the top 25 and others receiving votes, if you know anything about polls, you also always look at the bottom line as well. Not a single team other than Jackson State from the SWAC is in or is even mentioned in top 25 or others receiving votes. So just keep that in your pocket as well. What else we got, Steve? Anything else you want to talk about with the FCS before we get on out of here?
Well, just a couple of games of note this week. Holy Cross has really a lot of national media's ears have sort of perked up because they've had some terrific games. They're not undefeated. Well, I'm sorry, they are undefeated because they actually did pull the one game, so they're 4-0. They're in the Patriots, so not a power FCS conference, but they played everybody tough, and they're going to be taking on Harvard. So, and they generally play the Ivy League schools on a regular basis. That's going to be a really interesting game. We talked about North Dakota State. They're playing Youngstown State. Now, if this game was going to be played at Youngstown State, just across the state border from where I am here in Pittsburgh, I would say Youngstown State could very well upset them. But, I mean, it's going to be a very good football game. And then Eastern Washington, Florida. Eastern Washington is a traditional national power in the FCS. They've lost some tough games to Division I schools already, but given all the things that are happening, the game got moved. So in theory, even with the hurricane there and the distractions, maybe Eastern Washington is coming in later as opposed to sooner. That's a game to watch where I don't want to say it's going to be an upset alert, but you're going to see Florida maybe sweating this game out into the fourth quarter.
Ooh, I like that. That's something that gets me excited. Florida is a team that just found their way outside of the top 25 in the AP poll, try to battle a way back out of it. Losing to an FCS team would not be the right answer for that. Speaking of the FCS, there are 12 unbeaten FCS teams left. We've talked about a few of them already. It'll be interesting to see if there are any left, or there will be some left, I know, but it'll be interesting how many are left when we talk about them again with an FCS segment next week. One of them that we talk about is Sacramento State. And Sacramento State hammered Colorado State last week. That was another one of those upsets. The FCS teams are 8-96 against the FBS this season. That might sound like a terrible record, but when you put it in perspective, that's actually pretty impressive. There's 14 matchups left. you got to think that they might find a way to get 10 wins against the FCS this year. I mean, that would be really impressive. 10 and 110 doesn't sound great. And maybe, especially if you're playing baseball or something like that. But if you can get 10 wins against the, top Division I teams for the FCS, I think that's huge.
Oh, no, I agree 1,000% on that. And it's unfortunate that the casual college football fan, unless they're, like I said earlier, are in that market, kind of dismiss these kind of games like Eastern Washington. Who's Eastern Washington? Blah, 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 blah. Oh, do a little digging. That's why they have Google and the internet now. Look at the traditions of a lot of these schools, whether they be in the Colonial or the Ivy League. Big Sky has always produced national powers out of that conference. So ideally, maybe with segments like this, we're going to do a little fishing, get a couple nibbles, and maybe you folks are all going to be able to jump in and really give us your feedback and how you view what the FCS is versus the FBS. You could even say, because some FCS conferences don't offer athletic scholarships, it's the true college athlete.
Yeah, one thing, if you're not impressed about the NIL deals, this is a perfect way to look at what's going on. Obviously, NIL deals are still in the mix in FCS, but obviously not as much as you see in FBS. We're going to talk about the FCS at least once a week as we continue on here at Slasher U.